If you've ever felt like English grammar is just this totally confusing maze with rules that literally change on a whim, trust me, you are not alone. Welcome to this explainer. Think of it as your ultimate survival manual. Whether you're a native speaker who just relies on that gut feeling or a dedicated language learner trying to memorize a mountain of exceptions, we know the rules of English can be incredibly frustrating. So we're going to decode the logic behind the language and finally make sense of the madness. To do that, we're pulling our toolkit directly from some heavy hitters. We've got insights from Martin Parrott's brilliant book, Grammar for English Language Teachers, right alongside practical, classroom-tested lessons from the AL/ESL curriculum. So we aren't just staring at the rules today, we're actually uncovering the hidden reasons behind them. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, naming things, mastering nouns. Second, the tricky world of articles. Third, counting it out with quantifiers. Fourth, adding flavor with adverbs. And finally, number 5, the evolution of language. Part 1. Naming things, mastering nouns. So the moment we start labeling our physical world, we immediately hit our first major grammatical roadblock: countable versus uncountable nouns. This whole divide relies on the concept of distinct units versus abstract masses. Countable nouns describe separate things you can actually isolate. Think pounds, individual jobs, specific hours. You can easily slap a number in front of them. Uncountable nouns, they describe substances, liquids, or these big abstract concepts like money, work, or time. I mean, you'd never say, hey, can I have 3 monies? Right? You don't count them, you measure them. Now, if you've ever struggled with this, your frustration is totally, absolutely valid. The tricky part is that this distinction is grammatical, not necessarily based on physical reality, and that creates some highly frustrating exceptions. Take words like accommodation, bread, hair, information, news, spaghetti, travel, and weather. In English, these are strictly uncountable. You literally cannot have an information or a good weather. Native speakers take this completely for granted, but honestly, it's just something you have to memorize. They act as a collective mass in English grammar, and that's just how the cookie crumbles. Moving right along to part 2, the tricky world of articles. Okay, so every single time we use a noun, we're forced to make a choice. Do we use a, an, or the? And that choice is this messy, complex interaction of shared knowledge, context, and idioms. Let's look at the definite article, the. Its foundational job is basically to act as a signal flare to the listener. It indicates shared knowledge, or what our source calls common ground. Like, if I walk up to you and say, I saw an accident, I use an because it's brand new information to you. But if I ask, did you see the accident? I'm signaling that you already know or can easily figure out from context exactly which accident I'm talking about. But here is where those reliable rules of thumb just completely clash with reality. So, what does this all mean when exceptions pop up? Why on earth do we say we go to hospital without an article, but we go to the cinema with one? Think about it. They are both physical buildings we travel to, right? This exact friction between foundational rules and everyday idioms is where English gets really, really interesting. Now, what's really fascinating here is the hidden logic behind it, which is known as the institution rule. We actually completely drop the article before places like hospital, prison, school, or sea when we want to show that someone is taking part in that institution. So if you say someone is in hospital, it means they're there as a patient. They essentially belong to the institution for the time being. But phrases like the cinema or the pub, those are just fixed idioms for leisure activities, so this rule just doesn't apply to them at all. Which brings us to part 3, counting it out. Quantifiers. Step into the wild landscape of quantifiers. These are words like some, any, much, many, and few that we stick at the beginning of a noun phrase to help us measure our resources. Let's take the word some. It is truly fascinating how simply changing your vocal stress completely alters the grammatical meaning of the word. When you don't stress it, like saying, I have some time, it just means an indefinite neutral quantity. No big deal. But when you hit it with heavy vocal stress, like, I like some music, it suddenly means a restricted quantity or type. You're heavily implying, but by no means all. All right, part 4, adding flavor with adverbs. Adverbs are basically our essential tools for describing actions and adding flavor. But before we get into the weeds, I want you to hear this real comment from an ALL/ESL student, John Doe. He said, "Thanks, my grades are better because of this. This is also easy to understand." I love that because it's a great reminder. Grasping these structural rules isn't just dry theory. It actively, genuinely empowers you to communicate far more effectively in the real world. So there are 5 main categories of adverbs that give us this kind of precision. Degree answers how much or to what extent. Frequency tells us how often. Manner expresses how something happens. Usually you do this by adding an ly to an adjective, like quickly. Place describes where, and time tells us when. Now let's drill down specifically into frequency because it's something we use every single day. And this brilliantly illustrates how frequency actually works on a sliding, almost mathematical scale. Think about it as a clean progression. We start all the way down at never for a 0% occurrence, then we move up to rarely at around 20%. We hit sometimes right at that 50% coin toss mark, climb up to usually at 90%, and finally max out at always for a solid guaranteed 100%. It gives you a highly precise toolkit for expressing exactly how often a thing takes place. And finally, part 5, the evolution of language. You know, grammar really isn't just some static list of rules trapped in a dusty textbook. It's a living, breathing entity that constantly changes as our society changes. For example, traditionally, words with Latin or Greek roots like data and media were strictly plural forms. You absolutely had to say the data are or the media are. But language is like a current. It's constantly pulling these complex plural nouns into simpler singular forms. Today, saying the data is or the media is has become completely standard modern usage, even in super formal contexts. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. The word criteria is technically the plural form of criterion, yet you can hear it being used as a singular noun pretty much everywhere today. If the supposedly rigid rules of grammar can shift this dramatically in just our own lifetime, what do you think the English language will look like in another 100 years? It's wild to think about. Grammar is happening all around you, every single day. Keep your ears open, keep observing language in the wild, and most importantly, keep learning. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.